Still talking to his son about all he had witnessed during his tour around the heavens, Enoch said to Methuselah, "And now, my son Methuselah, I shall tell you of my visions. I saw two visions quite unlike any other. The first when I was learning to write, and the second before I married your mother. The second was a terrible vision, and regarding them I prayed to the Lord. I had laid down in the house of my grandfather Mahalalel, when I saw in a vision how the heavens collapsed and fell to the earth, and when it fell to the earth, I saw how the earth was swallowed up in a great abyss, and mountains were suspended on mountains, and hills sank down on hills, and high trees were ripped from their stems and hurled down and sunk in the abyss. And I lifted up my voice and cried aloud and said, 'The earth is destroyed.' And my grandfather Mahalalel woke me as I lay near him and said to me, 'Why do you cry so, my son? And why do you make such lamentation?' And I recounted to him the whole vision which I had seen, and he said to me, 'You have seen a terrible thing, my son. Your dream is of a grave time and concerns the secrets of all the sin of the earth. It must sink into the abyss and be totally destroyed. And now, my son, arise and pray to the Lord of glory, since you are a believer, that a remnant may remain on the earth, and that he may not destroy the whole earth. For from heaven all this will come upon the earth, and on the earth there will be great destruction.' And so I, Enoch, arose and prayed and implored and besought God, and wrote down my prayer for the generations of the world, and I will show everything to you, my son Methuselah. After praying about my vision, when I had gone out and seen the heaven, and the sun rising in the east, and the moon setting in the west, and the stars and the whole earth just as it is, I lifted up my hands and blessed the Holy and Great One, saying, 'Blessed be you, O Lord King, great and mighty in your greatness, Lord of the whole creation of heaven, King of kings and God of the whole world. For you have made and you rule all things. Nothing is too hard for you. Wisdom never departs from the place of your throne, nor turns away from your presence. You know and see and hear everything, and there is nothing hidden from you, for you see everything. And now the angels of your heavens are guilty of trespass, and on the flesh of men abide your wrath until the great day of judgment. I implore and beseech, O Lord and great King, to fulfill my prayer, to leave me a posterity on earth, and not destroy all the flesh of man, and make the earth without inhabitant, that there should be an eternal destruction. My Lord, destroy from the earth the flesh which has aroused your wrath, but the flesh of righteousness and uprightness establish as an eternal plant bearing seed forever, and hide not your face from the prayer of your servant, O Lord.' And after this I had another dream. In that vision, a white bull came out from the earth. After it came out a heifer, and along with the heifer came two bulls, one of them black and the other red. Then that black bull gored the red one and pursued him over the earth, and I could no longer see that red bull. But that black bull grew bigger, and the heifer went with him, and I saw that many oxen proceeded from him, which resembled and followed him. Later, however, the heifer, now a cow, went away from the presence of the black bull to seek that red one, but found him not, and mourned and sought him. And the first bull, that white one, came to her and calmed her, and from that time onward she cried no more. And after that she bore many bulls and cows, white and black. And that first white bull likewise grew and became a great white bull, and from him proceeded many white bulls which resembled him. And the younger white bulls fathered many white calves, which resembled them, one following another. Then behold, a star fell from heaven, and it arose and ate and pastured among those oxen. And the large black bulls all changed their stalls and pastures and their heifers, and began living with each other. And again I looked towards heaven, and behold, I saw many stars descend and cast themselves down from heaven to that first star, and those stars became bulls among the herd of cattle and oxen, and pastured with them. Then those stars which became bulls all let out their sexual members that looked like those of horses, and began to mount the heifers and cows of the oxen, and they all became pregnant and bore elephants, camels, and donkeys. The other oxen feared them, and were frightened of them, and began to bite with their teeth, and to devour, and to gore with their horns. They began to devour those oxen, and behold, all the children of the earth began to tremble and shake before them, and to flee from them. They gored each other and devoured each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Then I raised my eyes again to heaven, and behold, there came out from heaven beings who were like white men. 4 came out first, and 3 others followed them. And those 3 that had come out last grasped me by my hand and took me up, away from the generations of the earth, and raised me up to a high place, and showed me a tower raised high above the earth, and all the hills were lower. Then one of them said to me, "Remain here until you see everything that befalls those elephants, camels, and donkeys, and the stars that became oxen, and all of the herd." And I saw one of those 4 white men who had come out first, as he seized that first star which had fallen from heaven, and bound it hand and foot, and cast it into an abyss so narrow and deep and horrible and dark. Then another of the white men drew a sword, and gave it to those elephants and camels and donkeys, and the animals began to smite each other, and the whole earth shook because of them. And as I watched, another of those first 4 white men who had come out stoned them from heaven. They gathered and took all the great stars whose sexual members were like those of horses, and bound them all hand and foot, and threw them in an abyss of the earth. Then the last one of those 4 went to that white bull, and instructed him in a secret, and the white bull was terrified. He was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel and dwelt on it, and 3 other bulls dwelt with him in that vessel, and they were covered over. And again I raised my eyes towards heaven and saw a high roof, with 7 water torrents on it, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. Fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and the water began to bubble and swell and rise on the surface, until all the surface of that enclosure was covered with water. The water, darkness and mist increased on it, and the height of the water rose above the height of the enclosure, and was streaming over it as it stood on the earth. And all the animals that were in the enclosure sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water. But that great vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen and elephants and camels and donkeys sank to the bottom with all the other animals, that I could no longer see them. They were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. I watched until those water torrents were removed from that high roof, and the chasms of the earth were levelled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these abysses, until the earth became visible, and the darkness retired, and light appeared, but that vessel settled on the earth. Then that white bull which had become a man came out of that vessel, along with the 3 bulls with him. And one of those 3 was white like that bull, and one of them was red as blood, and the other black. And that white bull departed from them. They began to bring out beasts of the field and birds, so that there arose different generations of lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens. And among them was born a white bull, and the animals began to bite one another. But that white bull which was born among them fathered a wild donkey, and a white bull with it. And the wild donkeys multiplied. The white bull which was born from him fathered a black wild boar and a white sheep, and the former fathered many boars. But the sheep gave birth to 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the donkeys, and the donkeys again gave up that sheep to the wolves, and that sheep grew up among the wolves. And the Lord brought the 11 sheep to live with it, and to pasture with it among the wolves, and they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. And the wolves began to fear them, and oppress them, until they destroyed their little ones, and threw their young into a deep river. And those sheep began to cry aloud on account of their little ones, and to complain to their Lord. And a sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild donkeys. And I saw the sheep how they lamented and cried, and besought their Lord with all their might, until that Lord of the sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a high abode, and came to them and pastured them. The Lord called that sheep which had escaped the wolves, and spoke with it concerning the wolves, that it should admonish them not to touch the sheep any more. And that sheep went to the wolves according to the word of the Lord, and another sheep met it and went with it. And the 2 went and entered together into the assembly of those wolves, and spoke with them and admonished them not to touch the sheep from then on. However, the wolves more harshly oppressed the sheep with all their power, and the sheep cried aloud. And the Lord came to the sheep, and they began to beat those wolves, and the wolves began to make lamentation. But the sheep became quiet and ceased to cry out. And I saw the sheep until they departed from among the wolves. But then the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and the wolves went in pursuit of the sheep with all their power, and the Lord of the sheep went with them as their leader, and all his sheep followed him. His face was dazzling and glorious and terrible to behold. The wolves began to pursue those sheep until they reached a sea of water. That sea was divided, and the water stood on the left and right side before their face, and their Lord led them and placed himself between them and the wolves. And as those wolves had not yet seen the sheep proceeded into the midst of that sea. Then the wolves followed the sheep and ran after them into that sea. And when the wolves saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to flee before his face, but that sea gathered itself together and became as it had been created, and the water swelled and rose until it covered the wolves. All the wolves who pursued those sheep perished and were drowned. On the other hand, the sheep escaped unscathed from that water and went out into the wilderness, where there was no water and no grass. And I saw the Lord of the sheep pasturing them and giving them water and grass, and that elected sheep was leading them. The Lord of the sheep appeared before his sheep, and they all feared and trembled because of him, for his appearance was great and terrible and majestic, and all those sheep saw him and were afraid before his face. They said to their leader, "We are not able to stand before our Lord or to behold him." And so their leader ascended to the summit of that rock to speak with the Lord. However, when he was gone, a greater part of the sheep turned away from their Lord without realizing it. And so the leader of the sheep took other sheep with it, and came to those sheep which had fallen away, and began to slay them. And the sheep feared its presence, and thus that sheep brought back those sheep that had fallen away, and they returned to their folds. And that sheep became a man and built a house for the Lord of the sheep, and placed all the sheep in that house. And I watched until this sheep, which had met that sheep which led them, died. All the great sheep perished, and little ones arose in their place, and they came to a pasture, and approached a stream of water. Then that sheep, their leader, which had become a man, withdrew from them and also died, and all the sheep looked for it and cried over it. When they left off crying for that sheep, and crossed that stream of water, there arose the two sheep as the new leaders in the place of those which had led them and died. And the sheep came to a good place and a pleasant and glorious land, where they were satisfied. Sometimes their eyes were opened, and sometimes blinded, until another sheep arose and led them and brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. Then the dogs and the foxes and the wild boars began to devour those sheep until the Lord of the sheep raised up another sheep, a ram from their midst, which led them. And that ram began to butt on either side those dogs, foxes, and wild boars until he had destroyed them all. But then the ram forsook its glory and began to butt those sheep, and trampled on them, and behaved itself unseemly, and the Lord of the sheep raised another ram to be the leader of the sheep instead of that ram which had forsaken its glory. But while being raised, those dogs oppressed the sheep. And the first ram pursued the second ram, and the second ram fled before it, until those dogs pulled down the first ram. Then that second ram arose and led the little sheep, and those sheep grew and multiplied. All the dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled before it, and that ram butted and killed the wild beasts, and those wild beasts had no longer any power among the sheep, and robbed them no more of anything. That ram fathered many sheep and died, and a little sheep became ram in its place, and became prince and leader of those sheep. And their house became great and broad, and a great tower was built on the house for the Lord of the sheep, that the Lord of the sheep stood on that tower whenever they offered a full table before him. But again those sheep erred and went many ways, and forsook their house. And the Lord of the sheep called some from among the sheep and sent them to the sheep, but the deviant sheep began to slay them. One of them was saved and was not slain, and it fled away and cried aloud over the sheep, and they sought to slay it, But the Lord of the sheep saved it from the sheep and brought it up to me and caused it to live there. And he sent many other sheep to those sheep to testify to them and lament over them. And so the Lord of the sheep forsook their house and their tower and brought much slaughter among the deviant sheep in their herds. He gave them over into the hands of the lions and tigers and wolves and hyenas, and into the hand of the foxes, and to all the wild beasts, and those wild beasts began to tear those sheep to pieces. And I began to cry aloud with all my power, and to appeal to the Lord of the sheep, because the sheep were being devoured by all the wild beasts. But the Lord remained unmoved, though he saw it, and rejoiced that they were devoured and swallowed and robbed and left them to be devoured in the hand of all the beasts. Finally, the Lord called 70 shepherds, and gave those sheep to them, that they might pasture them. And he spoke to the shepherds and their companions, saying, Let every one of you pasture the sheep from now on, and everything that I shall command you, that do you. And I will deliver them over to you duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them will you destroy. And he gave over to them those sheep, and he called another and spoke to him, saying, Observe and mark everything that the shepherds will do to those sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded them. And every excess destruction which will be done through the shepherds, record how many they destroy according to my command, and how many according to their own caprice. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects, and read out before me by number how many they destroy, and how many they deliver over for destruction, that I may have this as a testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, that I may comprehend and see what they do, whether or not they abide by my command, which I have commanded them. But they shall not know it, and you shall not declare it to them, nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds effect, each in his time, and lay it all before me. And I saw that the shepherds began to slay and to destroy more than they were bidden, and they delivered those sheep into the hands of the lions. And the lions and tigers ate and devoured the greater part of those sheep, and the wild boars ate along with them. And they burned that tower of the Lord and demolished the house of the sheep. And all this was written down by the watcher in a book, and read before the Lord of the sheep. The destruction of the sheep continued, for the birds of the sky joined in the slaughter of the sheep. The eagles, the vultures, the kites, and the ravens began to devour those sheep. They picked out their eyes and devoured their flesh. And the sheep cried out to no avail, for the birds kept on tearing and swooping down on them and devouring them until the sheep could cry no more and endured their suffering in silence. And I saw that man, who wrote down the names of the shepherds and all about the destruction of the sheep in their hands. He brought them up before the Lord of the sheep and read everything to the Lord. Thus the Lord descended in fury, and all those who saw him ran and fell into the shadow in front of him. The Lord took the staff of his anger and struck the earth, and the earth was split. And the birds of the sky fell and sank in the earth, and it closed over them. A great sword was given to the sheep, and the sheep proceeded against all the beasts of the field to slay them. And all the beasts and the birds of heaven fled before their face. And the Lord commanded his angels to bring to him all the deviants, beginning with the first star, and all those other stars whose private members were like those of horses. And it was done. For the stars were bound and brought, they were judged and found guilty, and were cast into an abyss, full of fire and flames, and full of pillars of fire. Those shepherds who erred were also judged and found guilty, and they were cast into that fiery abyss. Likewise all those deviant sheep were all judged and found guilty, and cast into the fiery abyss, where they burned, and their bones burned. Then the Lord of the sheep built a new house greater and loftier than that first, and set it up in the place of the first which had been overthrown. All its pillars and ornaments were new and larger than those of the first, and all the sheep were within it. And all the beasts on the earth and birds of heaven began doing homage to those sheep, and making petition to and obeying them in everything. After I had seen all these, those 3 men who were clothed in white and had taken me up by the hand, took me up and set me down in the midst of those righteous sheep before the judgment took place. Those sheep were all white, and their wool was abundant and clean, and the Lord of the sheep rejoiced with great joy. And their eyes were all opened, for there was not one among them that did not see. A white bull was born with very large horns, that all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air feared him and made petitions to him all the time. All their generations were transformed, and they all became white bulls. The first among them became a lamb, and that lamb became a great animal with great black horns on its head, and the Lord of the sheep rejoiced over it and over all the oxen. This is the vision which I saw while I slept, and I awoke and blessed the Lord of righteousness and gave him glory. Then I wept greatly on account of the terrible things I had seen. For everything shall come to pass and be fulfilled. For all the deeds of men in their order have been shown to me.